I wanted to formally apologize to your families on behalf of the government of Manitoba for what you have gone through these past few months.
Tonight, an apology and talks of searching a Winnipeg-area landfill have started. Reaction to the question of Buffy Sainte-Marie's ancestry are coming out.
We've only sifted through the records from 1967 and on.
And the NWT is in search of records from residential schools. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. A CBC investigation questioning iconic artist Buffy Sainte-Marie's indigeneity is creating a lot of discussion. APTN's Fraser Needham talked to a few First Nations media commentators to get their thoughts. Here's that story.
Buffy Sainte-Marie is one of the world's best-known Indigenous artists. But a new CBC documentary is raising serious questions about the validity of her Indigenous heritage. Toronto Metropolitan University professor Pam Palmater says although uncomfortable, some important questions need to be asked.
Was she Indigenous at birth? Yes or no? What does the evidence say? If she was she, if she wasn't, was she adopted as a child into an Indigenous family, either officially or according to Cree custom? It's either yes or no. Then as an adult, was she adopted into a community and made a band member, or was she adopted into a family? McGill University professor Veldon Coburn agrees that although painful, these questions must be explored.
Well, they're meritorious questions, I think. You know, we a lot of people don't want to believe. We just don't think or never really wanted to go down that. But there was some shifting claims, and the evidence kind of, on the balance of probabilities, makes us want to question more.
Nevertheless, Saskatchewan lawyer Eleanor Sunchild takes a different view and believes Sainte-Marie is Indigenous. Sunchild deals with 60 Scoop cases and says documentation can often be hard to come by.
In my practice doing historical files and specifically working with 60 Scoop adoptees, there have been major problems with documentation. I have seen birth certificates that have been falsified. I have seen there's so much missing information in the 60 Scoop files.
But at the same time, Palmater says there are some serious issues Sainte-Marie needs to set the record straight on.
So there's a lot of very specific issues that we have to parse out. And I think the most important one for all of this is, what did she know? When did she know? And has she been honest?
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
And you can find more on that story on our website, aptnnews.ca. On Thursday, Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew met with the families of two First Nations women whose remains are believed to be in a Winnipeg-area landfill. It was the first meeting to discuss the search of the landfill since Kinew became Premier in early October. Tamara Pimentel has more.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew told the families of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron what they've waited a long time to hear.
I wanted to formally apologize to your families on behalf of the government of Manitoba for what you have gone through these past few months.
It was for the pain they endured by the previous provincial government. This happened just before a meeting to discuss a search for two Winnipeg area landfills.
It was a beautiful, beautiful way to reset that relationship that is needed here in the Manitoba legislature.
Chief Kyra Wilson of Long Plain First Nation and Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kathy Merrick addressed media after the meeting. They say past experiences in the legislature brought a lot of hurt, but this time it was different.
Have the pipe lead the way of our journey with this government has really touched my heart, and my heart is very light today.
The meeting comes just 1 week after Kinew was sworn into his new role as the first First Nations Premier of Manitoba. Former Premier Heather Stephenson opposed a landfill search, saying there were too many risks with no guaranteed outcome. that became a political prop during the recent election campaign. It's believed that the remains of Harris and Myron are in the Prairie Green landfill north of Winnipeg. A study showed a search is feasible and estimated it could take up to 3 years and could cost just under $200 million. For the past year, protesters calling for a landfill search have gained support from across the country. Donna Bartlett, grandmother of Myron, says an apology from Canoe is relieving.
And I'm happy that he did apologize, because it's been a long year and a half, and to hear that from one of the premiers is absolutely amazing.
Families and leaders now have under 90 days to further assess the search after receiving over $700,000 from the federal government earlier this month. Merrick says the families are optimistic after finally hearing a search will go on.
They're the most resilient people I've ever encountered to be in their presence, and they never once back down.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
It's been an unprecedented year for wildfires and evacuations in the Northwest Territories. Now, Indigenous leaders are calling for a full, independent public inquiry into the emergency management response. Our Charlotte Moore-Jacobs brings us that story.
It's been an unforgettable year for wildfires north of 60. And now that the smoke is cleared, Indigenous leaders want to give a voice to the public. The Dene Nation is calling for a full independent public inquiry into the management and response of a wildfire season which displaced 70% of the Northwest Territories population.
Sharing their experiences, looking at the lessons that may come out of it, to review them and take a look at the steps that we need to take, and so that we were prepared.
Dene National Chief Gerald Antoine says the territorial government needs to acknowledge Dene authority and governance in response planning. According to him, apart from some fire updates, there was little to no communication from GNWT with the Dene Nation about evacuations.
The evacuation, and also in terms of meeting the needs of the community, that part lacked, that information lacked. I also reached out to the Premier and also really encourage her that we need to have an emergency, the state of emergency.
The community of Fort Smith was evacuated for 6 weeks. Since then, Smith's Landing First Nation, Salt River First Nation, the local Métis Council, and the town of Fort Smith have banded together to listen to community members' concerns. Fort Smith Mayor Fred Daniels says he and other local leadership have held community meetings to hear suggestions from the public, like creating a second road to act as a fire escape between Fort Smith and Fort Chipewyan.
The road that we're talking about is from here to Chipewyan. The fastest road is to Chip. It'll get us, them people here, us over there if we have to. And there was, yeah.
Meanwhile, the GNWT has said there'll be an after-actions review, but that the scope will not include public engagement. Chief Antoine says the review needs to include the public and Indigenous knowledge of wildfire response and lessons learned from evacuees themselves.
The people's information, their experiences, is the one that will really see how we were, how things that needed to be, and it will help us to make the necessary steps.
APTN was unable to speak with the GNWT for this story due to a media blackout during this fall's election season. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Thanks, Charlotte. If you were evacuated this summer, we'd like to hear from you. Here's how to continue the conversation. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, you can go to our website, aptnnews.ca. And you can find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Time for a quick break. Still to come, why it's so difficult to access residential school records in the Northwest Territories.
We've only sifted through the records from 1967 and on. There are some records that were brought to Ottawa at 1967 that were a little bit previous to that.
Welcome back. The Northwest Territories is lagging behind in the pursuit of obtaining residential school records. Files are stored down south, and some of the documentation is in rough shape, if it exists at all. Our Charlotte Moore Jacobs explains.
There's a growing call for the release of all residential school records, including those of children who died there. But in the Northwest Territories, information isn't easily accessible because the records aren't stored here. NWT Chief Coroner Garth Eggenberger says records prior to 1967 are housed at the Government of Canada's archives in Ottawa.
We've only sifted through the records from 1967 and on. There are some records that were brought to Ottawa at 1967 that were a little bit previous to that. Those are housed in the Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre.
In September, Eggenberger explained this dearth of data to the hearing with the Standing Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples.
Some of the records that we have for the cases are 1 or 2 pages. That's it, you know. Around 1967 and before, they were really, the coroner's office wasn't a sort of a standalone office where the records were sent to a primary office. That started happening in 67 to 75. And then the quality of records going forward dramatically picks up.
The Senate committee has been holding public hearings to fulfill a commitment they made in their interim report, honoring the children who never came home. The report was released in July. Prince Edward Island Senator Brian Francis chairs the committee. He says the nationwide hearings are taking place to find out why governments, churches, and other groups are withholding records.
A lot of it comes down to the lack of financial resources to do the job promptly and expeditiously, and also the lack of human resources to dive into the records and present them to the people that need to have them, and also jurisdictional issues.
There were 14 residential schools in the Northwest Territories, and with limited access, the coroner's office does not have the records for all those schools. So far, they've identified 6 children who died in residential schools or a federally run hostel. But are they the only ones? Eggenberger says obtaining records on all the children who died in these schools and associated facilities without the death certificate will take time.
If they were, for example, in a residential school and they became sick, went to a hospital, spent time in the hospital and died, then we wouldn't have a record of that. So that's a sort of falling between the crack.
The Chief Coroner's Office says they are now working with the Roman Catholic Church and Vital Statistics and the NWT. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Anishinaabe author and journalist Wabgishik Rice has just released his hotly anticipated new novel. Moon of the Turning Leaves is a sequel to the national bestseller Moon of the Crusted Snow. Rice is currently on a book tour, and we spoke to him earlier today. Wabgishik Rice, thanks so much for being here with us and wearing your Leafs sweater there. Moon of the Crusted Snow came out in 2018, but it really took off during the pandemic, given its post-apocalyptic storyline. But for those who aren't familiar with the world you've created, can you give us a bit of a synopsis?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Moon of the Crested Snow is about a Northern Ontario Anishinaabe community that endures a world-ending blackout. But because the community is full of resourceful people that can hunt and live off the land, it's not an immediate crisis for them. But as the days turn into weeks, things slowly unravel, and then an unexpected visitor comes up from one of the cities to the south, and they have to make some tough choices about their future. So Moon of the Turning Leaves takes place about 10 years after the events of Moon of the Crusted Snow, and we find the same community faced with another tough decision. You know, the resources around them are starting to dwindle, and they realize that traditionally as Anishinaabe, they would have been migratory, moving from place to place, and it's time for them to allow the land to replenish. But also, they haven't seen what's happened in the world to the south, so they decide to go on this quest to see if in fact the world has ended, but also to hopefully reconnect with their original homeland on the north shore of Lake Huron, because it's described in the first book that they were originally displaced from there to far northern Ontario. So they're seeking out a homecoming of sorts.
It was so good, the book, and I know I've been waiting for years for the follow-up, and here it is. Look at it now, Moon of the Turning Leaves. Was it just a natural that you were going to be returning to this world?
Well, thanks for enjoying the first one. Yeah, I'm glad you really appreciated it. No, I never planned on looking into a sequel. To me, at the end of the first book, I felt like the characters were kind of riding off into the sunset, you know, and I was fine just leaving it at that. But there was a pretty positive response to the story right after it came out, and people would start to ask me if I was going to write a sequel, and at first I said no because I was just being honest, and they would be disappointed. So I started saying, okay, you know, maybe I'm thinking about it, but hadn't really given too much thought to it. But as the months went on, you know, I planted the idea in the back of my head, and I just allowed it to, you know, gestate a bit. And yeah, the path forward for the next story slowly emerged, and I got really excited about taking a look at these characters again, you know, re-exploring the world that they live in, and really like reviving the spirit of the Anishinaabe that really helped guide them through the crisis in the first book, and is what carries them through the second one as well.
Well, we were lucky to have you on Face to Face a few years back, and there was some talk then about a screen adaptation. Is that something that might be still in the works?
Well, I think that world moves very slowly, and I don't have much to report all these years later, unfortunately. But that's my dream. It would be great to see that happen. You know, I didn't write these books to have them as movies or TV series, but I think having them adapted in that way would be a great honor, and I'd just be really excited to see how that would happen, you know, considering the really powerful success of some recent series like The Last of Us and Station 11.
Absolutely. Love both of those. Wob, thanks so much for being with us. Good luck on the book tour and with the book.
Miigwech. Thanks a lot, Dennis. Great to be here again.
Brand new episode of APTN Investigates debuts tonight, right after this newscast. We'll speak with the reporter about it after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And our thanks to Clarence Jones for sending in this beautiful photo that he took in the territory of the Gitxsan Nation in British Columbia. Thanks as always, Clarence. When you're out and about this weekend, if you get a great photo, send that photo to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at your Saturday weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 20 for Halifax, 23 with showers in Fredericton, 0 with flurries in Kuujjuaq, snow and 3 in Nain, 19 with showers in Montreal, snow and 9 for Chibougamau, +4 with snow in Sault Ste. Marie, rain and 4 in North Bay, +2 with flurries in Thunder Bay, 1 and snow in Sioux Lookout, +1 with snow for God's Lake, 1 without snow in Norway House, -4 in Winnipeg, -1 with snow in Dauphin. Snow and -5 for Regina, partly cloudy and -4 for Saskatoon, -3 with flurries in Meadow Lake and Buffalo Narrows. A blustery day across northern Alberta, -1 with flurries in Fort Chip and Fort Mac. +1 with snow in Edmonton, sun's out a bit, and -1 in Lethbridge. +9 and sunny skies for Victoria, 7 under the sun in Vancouver, +1 in Prince George, sunny and -2 in Smithers, -9 in Old Crow, 6 below in Whitehorse, snow and 0 for Yellowknife, no snow and 0 in Norman Wells, -3 with flurries in Sax Harbor, snow and 0 in Paulatuck, -8 in Chesterfield and Whale Cove, -13 with snow in Resolute, 8 below in Igloolik. The Royal Canadian Legion's National Poppy Campaign officially starts today. Traditional poppy boxes will begin to be available at thousands of locations across the country in the lead up to Remembrance Day on November 11th. Digital poppies are also available online as another means of showing gratitude to veterans and their sacrifice for the country. Tonight on APTN Investigates, journalist Brittany Gio examines the sex work industry in Edmonton and uncovers a disturbing trend in the city. Brittany joins us now in studio. Brittany, thanks for being with us. You spent a week on the ground in Edmonton reporting on this. Can you tell us what that was like?
Yeah, so it was a pretty surreal and humbling experience on the ground in Edmonton. As a journalist, I'm fairly used to people opening up pretty quickly and wanting to chat about their life experience, and I quickly realized that that wasn't the case with this story. There was actually this immense apprehension to go on the record, and I think a lot of that is in part due to the media's historical misrepresentation of sex workers and the sex industry. So I really needed to give this story the extra care and attention that it deserves.
What did you learn while working on the story?
Yeah, there was a number of things that I learned while working on this story, and the main thing was really just language. The language that we use or don't use in the stories is it's really imperative in terms of fostering an environment of trust and inclusivity. And there was another thing that I learned, and that was related to the investigation that we were working on. We uncovered 215 missing and murdered women in the city. 22% of them were sex workers, and half of them were Indigenous sex workers.
Crazy stats there. You spoke with several advocates and sex workers. What do they want the public to know about the industry?
Yeah, so the main thing that they want the public to know is that not all sex workers are being human trafficked, and not all sex workers are being exploited. Street-level sex workers have also said that the main thing that would really help them is affordable housing.
Brittany, really looking forward to this important work. Thanks for talking to us about it.
Thanks for having me.
And you can watch that documentary on APTN Investigates in less than 2 minutes time right here. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Friday. For more on anything you've seen here, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. That's where you'll also find our special page on the history of the jingle dress, and it looks quite phenomenal. Check it out. I'm Dennis Ward-Marcy. Thanks for being with us. APTN Investigates is next. Have a great night.